On May 9th, Vladimir Putin stood at the Victory Day parade in Moscow and told reporters he believes the war in Ukraine is coming to an end. The headlines read it as a peace overture. Within hours, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov walked the entire framing back, calling any settlement a very long way off. Putin himself, in the same set of comments, vowed total victory and framed Russia as fighting the entire NATO bloc on the front line. The parade behind him was the most scaled back in nearly 2 decades. No tanks, no ballistic missiles, and no heavy hardware on Red Square for the first time since 2007. Mobile internet was shut down across the city to neutralize Ukrainian drones. An electronic warfare dome was deployed over the entire parade route. And the guest list had collapsed from 27 world leaders the year before to a handful of dependent states and a contingent of North Korean servicemen. This was not a man speaking from strength. This was a man telling a domestic audience that something has to give. And so today we look at what Putin actually said versus what is structurally happening underneath the Russian war machine. Why Ukraine's deep strike campaign is degrading the financial engine that funds the war, and why the gap between what Russia demands and what Ukraine can accept makes any near-term peace settlement essentially impossible. My name is Nick, and this is the Finance Bureau. Now, to understand why this Victory Day moment matters, you have to look at the stage Putin chose to deliver it on. Victory Day in Moscow has always been the most tightly choreographed piece of political theater in the Russian calendar. It is the day that the Kremlin uses to project continuity, military depth, and great power status to its own population and to whichever foreign leaders show up to share the platform. And this year, the platform was almost empty. The leaders in attendance came from Belarus, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Laos. The military hardware that usually rolls down the street was replaced by giant screens playing video of the equipment instead. The whole event lasted 45 minutes. Independent analysts at Rasmussen Global assessed his end-of-war comments as domestic political messaging aimed at a population exhausted by 4 years of war and heavy losses, not a genuine pivot in war aims. Translation: this was a speech engineered for the home front, not a signal to Kiev or Washington. And the reason that distinction matters is because the supposed 72-hour ceasefire that was meant to bracket the parade collapsed in real time on the same day Putin delivered the speech. Ukraine reported 51 combat engagements on May 9th alone. Russia, in turn, claimed Ukraine had violated the ceasefire close to 9,000 times. Russian drone strikes killed at least 3 people during that truce window. The 1,000 for 1,000 prisoner exchange that was supposed to be the goodwill marker descended into a mutual recrimination within hours. And Zelensky's response cut through all of it. He stated plainly that the Russian army was not observing any silence, and he issued a symbolic decree permitting the Moscow parade to proceed, a clear signal that Ukraine has the capacity to strike Red Square if it chose to, and it was choosing not to. And that signal is the entire subtext of the parade security architecture. The mobile internet blackout, the electronic warfare dome, the removal of the heavy hardware, none of it was about optics. It was about the Kremlin's assessment of what Ukrainian drones can now reach. And that brings us to the structural pressure that is actually forcing Putin's rhetoric to shift. Russian personnel losses have reached approximately 1.34 million in killed and wounded, according to Ukrainian figures. Independent outlets working from obituary and probate records have confirmed roughly 352,000 Russian soldiers killed since February 2022. Russia is currently losing around 35,000 men per month, while only recruiting between 24,000 and 30,000. In plain English, the war machine is shrinking in real time even as it tries to punch forward. Putin has refused to call a second public mobilization because he understands what the first one did to his political position and is unwilling to repeat the experiment. Drones now account for 70 to 80% of Russian casualties on the front line, which has fundamentally rewritten the cost curve of every meter of advance. And, despite all of this, the line itself has barely moved. Russia is currently advancing toward Pokrovsk at roughly 70 meters per day. In April 2026, Ukraine actually achieved a net territorial gain for the first time since August 2024. So, the man standing at the Victory Day platform telling reporters the war is coming to an end is doing so against a backdrop where his army is being depleted faster than it can be replaced, and the front line is moving in the wrong direction. Now, before we get into the deep strike campaign that is materially degrading Russia's ability to pay for any of this, if you want to make sense of what is actually moving in real time, who is conceding what, and how it is hitting the markets, then you should sign up for the Finance Bureau newsletter. It's absolutely free, and we break down everything across global finance, geopolitics, and markets so you don't miss what actually matters. All you have to do is click the link in the description or scan this QR code on the right of your screen. And now, back to the Kremlin's balance sheet. Because the front line is only one half of the structural picture, the other half is happening 1,800 kilometers behind it. Ukraine's deep strike campaign this year has moved from harassment to systemic degradation of Russian energy infrastructure. There were at least 21 confirmed strikes on Russian energy assets in April alone. Independent estimates put the lost Russian energy revenue since January at roughly $7 billion. Russian oil production was forced down by 300,000 to 400,000 barrels per day in April, the sharpest monthly decline in 6 years. The Tuapse refinery was hit 4 times in 16 days. The Kirishi refinery, facilities in Perm, Yaroslavl, and the Urals all took damage in the same window. Strikes have reached as far as the Sheremetyevo and Pulkovo airports, including disruption that forced mobile internet blackouts in St. Petersburg during parade rehearsals because of drone threats over the city itself. And this is part of the war that the cameras do not show. A campaign aimed at financial plumbing of the Russian state, not at the territory it claims to be defending. And the consequences are landing in the Russian budget in real time. The 2026 GDP growth forecast has been cut from 1.3% to just 0.4%. The 2027 forecast has been halved. Q1 GDP contracted by 0.3%, the first quarterly contraction since early 2023. The January to April budget deficit hit 5.88 trillion rubles, which is roughly about $79.5 billion. Oil and gas tax revenues are down 38.3% year-on-year, despite a Middle East-driven price spike that should have seen Moscow printing. The Bank of Russia has liquidated approximately 22 tons of gold since January to plug the gap. And Putin has reportedly scolded senior economic officials in front of cameras over weakness in manufacturing and industrial production, which is a rare public break from the normally choreographed image of Kremlin economic management. And this is the structural pressure forcing the rhetoric to soften. A government selling down its safe haven reserves to pay current bills is not a government with unlimited runway. A central bank running a deficit at 2.5% of GDP 4 months into a fiscal year which targeted 1.6% is not a central bank with patience. And the ruble paradox is worth pausing a bit on. The currency currently trades at around 73.79 against the dollar, close to its 52-week strongest level. On the surface, that appears to contradict the collapse narrative. In practice, it reflects capital controls, import compression, and the managed mechanics of a closed financial system, not organic economic health. The gold being shipped out of the vaults is the real signal. The currency print on the screen is the managed one. And then there is the personnel layer, which has become impossible to ignore. The FSB has tightened Putin's perimeter to the point where staff near him have had mobile phones banned and surveillance has been installed in the homes of his close aides. His movements are increasingly restricted to fortified facilities, reportedly including an underground facility in the Krasnodar region. He is appearing at military bases far less than he did in 2025, relying on pre-recorded video appearances instead. The two events feeding the current security posture, according to recent reporting, are the December 2025 assassination of a lieutenant general and the March 2026 arrest of the former deputy defense minister. Both are being read inside of the Kremlin as evidence that the elite is fracturing and that the fractures are moving closer to the center. The removal of the heavy hardware from the parade was directly linked to fears about Ukrainian drone reach, and the framing of the war as nearing completion in official rhetoric has to be read against a backdrop of an inner circle that is running out of people that it trusts. Which brings us to what peace would actually require. Russia's preconditions, as set out by Kremlin aides, are a full Ukrainian military withdrawal from the entire Donetsk region as the price of admission, formal recognition of Russian sovereignty over all 4 annexed oblasts, a binding permanent prohibition on Ukrainian NATO membership, and the complete cessation of Western military aid. Ukraine's position is the inverse at every structural point. Zero territorial concessions, binding international security guarantees, a full open-ended ceasefire as a prerequisite for talks rather than the outcome of them, and the Russian withdrawal to pre-February 2022 borders. There is no overlap, there is no zone of possible agreement, and the meeting paradox compounds it. Putin will only sit down with Zelensky after a treaty has been fully pre-negotiated by experts. Zelensky will only sit down with Putin as the final step of a treaty already concluded. Both leaders say they are open to a meeting. Both have defined the conditions for that meeting in ways that make it structurally impossible. Putin's nomination of former German Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder as a European mediator on May 9th told you everything you need to know about how serious the offer was. Schroeder is on the boards of payrolls of Russian state energy entities, never publicly condemned the 2022 invasion, and is described in Brussels as a high-level lobbyist for Russian energy interests rather than an honest broker. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas rejected the proposal within hours, describing it as Putin sitting on both sides of the table. The German government and Ukraine rejected it on the same day. The proposal was designed to fail. It existed to generate a news cycle to expose Western inflexibility for a domestic Russian audience. And the US track is not bridging the gap either. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner have visited Moscow at least 8 times since January. They have not made a single official negotiating visit to Kiev. Zelensky has called the asymmetry disrespectful. The Trump administration's bandwidth has been consumed by the US-Iran conflict, which has dragged Brent crude back above $107 a barrel and pushed the White House to issue temporary waivers on Russian oil sanctions to ease back the price shock. Kiev has publicly criticized those waivers as giving Moscow a sense of impunity. And Ukraine is now actively building parallel diplomatic channels with Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, and core European partners to reduce its structural dependence on a Washington track it no longer trusts. So, when you put all of this together, you start to see what the Victory Day speech actually was. And the clearest example of how you can read this in real time is in the markets. Defense stocks are diverging right now. Rheinmetall is down roughly 27% year-to-date, trading near its 52-week low as the war premium that built the position unwinds on ceasefire speculation. Hanwha Aerospace is up roughly 36% year-to-date and close to 59% over the past year on the back of a structural NATO supply chain integration that does not depend on the war continuing. Caterpillar is up around 57% year-to-date and 162% over the past year, pricing a reconstruction thesis that the World Bank, UN, and EU joint assessment values at $588 billion over a decade. Holcim is up close to 55% over a year on the same logic. Gazprom's American depository receipt is trading at $1.10 against a 52-week high of $10.72. And gold at $4,675 an ounce, up close to 46% over the past 12 months, is the macro signal underneath all of it. The most likely outcome from here is not a settlement. It is a continued grinding attrition. Russia does not have the manpower to break the front line convincingly, and Ukraine does not have the political room to cede the territory Russia demands. Putin is being forced toward the table by structural collapse, not strategic generosity. And the table he is being forced towards is one where the seating arrangement makes a deal impossible. Markets pricing in a near-term ceasefire and a fast-moving reconstruction cycle are running 12 to 24 months ahead of the geopolitical reality. The reconstruction trade may eventually be right. The defense rotation may eventually be right. The energy market normalization may eventually be right. None of them are right yet. But what do you think? Is Putin's Victory Day pivot the first genuine crack in the Russian war posture, or is it pure domestic theater? And does the Trump diplomatic track produce anything Kiev can actually accept? Or does Ukraine's pivot toward European and Gulf partners become the real settlement architecture? Feel free to get highly opinionated in the comments down below. And if you want to understand how the broader fracture between the Trump White House and the European security establishment is reshaping the Atlantic order heading into the second half of the decade, then you can check out our video on that right over here. That's all from me today. As always, thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. This is Nick, signing off.